Anurdhva paramanu syat Trasarenustraya smritaha Jalarka rashmiyavagataha Kamivanu Anurdhva paramanu syat Trasarenustraya smritaha Jalarka rashmiyavagataha Kamivanu patannagat Anurdhva paramanu syat Trasarenustraya smritaha Jalarka rashmiyavagataha Kamivanu patannagat. Please repeat. Mataji's. Anuhu. Double atom. Dvau. Two. Parama anu. Atoms. Syat. Become. Trasarenuhu. Hexatom. Trayaha. Three. Smritaha. Considered. Jala arka. Of sunshine through the holes of a window screen. Rashmi. By the rays. Avagataha. Can be known. Come eva. Toward the sky. Anupatan agat. Going up. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The division of gross time is calculated as follows. 2 atoms make up one double atom, and 3 double atoms make up one hexatom. This hexatom is visible in the sunshine which enters the holes of window screen. One can clearly see that the hexatom goes up toward the sky. The atom is described as an invisible particle, but when 6 such atoms combine together, they are called a trasarinu. And this is visible in the sunshine pouring through the holes of a window screen. I'll read text 6 as well. Trasarinu trikam bhunkti yakala satruti smritaha shatabhagas tu vedasyat tais tribis tu lavasmritaha. The time duration needed for the integration of 3 trasarinus is called a truti, and 100 trutis make up 1 vedha. 3 vedhas make up 1 lava. It is calculated that if a second is divided into 1,687.5 parts, each part is the duration of a truti, which is the time occupied by the integration of 18 atomic particles. Such combination of atoms into different bodies create the calculation of material time. The sun is the central point for calculating all different durations. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjanashalaki Achakshur Unmilitamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Ishtam Stapitam Mila Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mayan Tadatiswapadandigam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamishta Shri Rupam Sakarjatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadvitam Sabdutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivashakan Vitamshta. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhudina Manuj Gatpate Gopishak Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Demostuti Tamta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustate Devi Pranamami Harebhiye Vanchakapatu Vyashtra Kripasanubhi Vachapatita Nam Pamne Bhyo Vaishnavi Bhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Putulesh Mate Bhakti Vakasa Swamin Itnamane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Putulesh Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Itnamane Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Psharne Nirashesha Shunivadi Pashchate Deshitarne Bhutir Mahadbiri Mafur Vibor Nirmaya Shadiyat Amushaburashaha Bhukde Gudan Shudasha Shudashatmaka Surung Shishta Bhagavan Vashamsame. The division of gross time is calculated as follows. 2 atoms make up 1 double atom, and 3 double atoms make up 1 hexatom. This hexatom is visible in the sunshine which enters through the holes of a window screen. One can clearly see that the hexatom goes up toward the sky. The time duration needed for the integration of 3 trasarinus is called the truti, and 100 trutis make up 1 veda. 3 vedas make up 1 lava. So we're hearing about the calculation of time from the atom. It's very complicated, so I'll try. I won't try so much. I'll just give a little overview, and then I'll go into something else. So here, of this chapter, I remember there's one specific verse, because it talks about this trasarinu, which hexatom, Srila Prabhupada translates as, which is an interesting word. And it has here, Jalarka Rashmi Avagataha, that through a jala, through literally like a lattice, not exactly like a window. Window is made of glass, but it's talking here of like a lattice which covers a window. In India and Middle Eastern cultures, you see this. So you can imagine too. So the rays will pour in through that, and even in glass, you can see to some extent. Although through glass, the light is kind of has a little different effect. But in that light, those sort of beams or God rays, you could call it, you can see this hexagon is visible. It goes up toward the sky. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he makes the point that the other two, Anu or Paramanu, the other atoms, so the Anu and the Paramanu, Paramanu and the Anu, how do you know those exist? Trasarinu is there because you can see it, there's evidence for that, but the other two, there's not evidence for, so how do you know they exist? Well, because the Trasarinu is composed of these two. He explains like that. And sometimes it can be confusing. When you see the sun coming in through it, it looks like dust that's floating up. Sometimes it is. It could be a mixture of both. And in Manusmriti, this verse is also there. Not exactly this verse, but a description of also the different combination of atoms, and it also gives the same thing. And it talks about the Trasarinu there. And then it goes on. Furthermore, Trasarinu is the first point where you can perceive the atom. Otherwise, as Srila Prabhupada writes here, the atom is described as an invisible particle. So it's not visible, especially to the naked eye. Presumably, not even through instruments, as Srila Prabhupada is writing here, and also our acharyas are writing here. So the atom, what is called as the Paramanu, maybe a little different than the atomic atom scientists are observing with their instruments. But anyway, in Manu Samhita and also here, although this goes on to time, this makes the point of time. It gets into, we're talking about atoms, and then it talks about how if you divide a second into so many things, and then like that, and from atoms you go into time, which is quite bewildering. So in Manu Samhita, it just keeps quantity in terms of volume, and it gives the description that anyway it goes up like this. And I believe if you combine three of these hexatoms, you get what's called a egg of some insect, a very small a very small thing. And if you combine those together, you get what's the size of a black mustard seed. If you combine three of those things, so a hexatom times 3 is what's called as a black mustard seed in Sanskrit. Now, whether that's the size of a black mustard seed, or whether that's the name of the thing, that's debatable. Is to be seen. So, anyway, the Bhagavatam takes it in terms of time here, that if you go into the next verse, it gets into these technicalities. So it combines the terrestrial renews into what's called a truti. 100 trutis make one Veda, 3 Vedas make one Lava. So we're getting more into the time rather than just what's matter, although it's interrelated, as we understand. Yeah, it makes the point about the sun, and it gets very technical, which I won't get into. I'll just head on this point of lava and relate it to what I've been reading. So obviously we have this verse, lava, we know this, some of us at least. Lava. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he mentions this, as Shadu Sangha Sarva Shastrika. Lava Matra, Shadu Sangha Sarva Siddhi Hoy. That only a fraction, or Prabhupada translates as only a fraction of a second. In the purport to that, Srila Prabhupada he writes that lava is calculated as 1/11th fraction of a second. And Lord Chaitanya, he said, if you get this lava of association with a devotee, 1/11th fraction of a second of association with a devotee, all the shastras, all the scriptures say that association of that amount of time is sufficient to make one's life perfect. Sarva Siddhi Hoy, obtaining all perfection. So that's quite remarkable. How can it be so? Well, I'll speak on this a little bit. So this association with a devotee, even for one moment, we're speaking about time here, even one fraction of a second, it can make one perfect. How? Because it's a very potent process. Elsewhere in the same section, Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have the 5 very potent processes of Krishna consciousness. Sharu Sangha Nam Kirtan Bhagavat Shravan Mathura Ba Shri Mutir Shradaya Seban. 5 potent processes of devotional service. Beginning with Sharu Sangha, associating with devotees, getting an association of devotees. Lord Chaitanya, he mentions different processes, associating with devotees, chanting the holy name, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Mathura Vas means residing in Mathura, literally. Or you could more liberally taking it residing in a holy place, or more further understanding is residing within holy places is also considered a temple. So residing within a temple. Then Sri Murtir Shraddhaya Seban, serving the deity form, Archavigraha form of the Lord with great faith. So 5 different potent processes of devotional service. I'll just focus on the Sadhu Sangha, this association of devotees, and it's especially stressed everywhere. Why? Because Krishna consciousness begins from association with devotees. A sadhu, he gives one Krishna consciousness. A sadhu, he makes other sadhus. I read, I'll just kind of like branch from here from what I've been reading recently. I read a very nice purport, a string of purports, actually. You can pull up Bhagavatam, I read this yesterday, actually, 3:22:5, and I'll just kind of generally go through it. I don't know if I'll read all the purports, but there's one I especially want to read. You can go to the Sanskrit for this one, actually, because it's nice. For those who know the Sanskrit of the first canto, I'm forgetting the verse. Tvam no sandarshita tatra, something, something like this. It comes somewhat similarly. Tava sandarshanareva chinname sarva samshayaha. It's very nice. And then yet svayam bhagavan pritya dharma maham Translation, now I have resolved all my doubts simply by meeting you. For your lordship has very kindly and clearly explained the duty of a king who desires to protect his subjects. It's very nice how it comes here. He says, just by getting your vision of you, just by seeing you, this is, by the way, Manu, Swayambhuva Manu, speaking to Kardama Muni. Swayambhuva Manu is a great ruler of the earth, and he's on tour, or somehow or another, he comes across the cottage of Kardama Muni, who's an ascetic, who's a yogi, also a devotee, and he meets him, and anyway, there's so much backstory, and there's so many things that happen, but he sees him, and this king, he's very respectful of him, and he's very appreciative of him, that he feels, despite him having so much land, subjects under his control, having so much power and wealth, he feels himself very fortunate that he's meeting such a great rishi, a great sage. And just by seeing him, Chinam Mesarva Samshaya, just by seeing Kardama Muni, all his doubts are cut off. Kardama Muni hasn't even so much spoken to him, actually, at this point. Some words were, let me just see. Actually, no. There's some glorification words there, but no specific, really substantial instruction. So, really not much has taken place in between. Nevertheless, just by the meeting of the two, we're talking about 11 mantra, 11th of a second, Manu is expressing his appreciation of getting the association of a sadhu. Sadhu means a saintly person, we translate as. Sadhu, it's related to the word Shastra. Sadhu is one who is grounded in Shastra, who follows Shastra, who knows Shastra and specifically lives by Shastra, lives by Scripture, lives by the tenets of Scripture, and he knows it and he teaches it to others. So succinctly, that's what a sadhu is. And then, so Kardama Muni, Manu, he's met such a sadhu in Kardama Muni. And then in his purport, Srila Prabhupada, he writes, I'll just gloss over some points because if I read all this, it will be very long. Anyway, it's nice how it comes here. Manu, from the first paragraph, Manu describes herewith the result of seeing a great saintly person, that all one's doubts are cut off. Lord Chaitanya says that one should always try to associate with saintly persons because if one establishes a proper association with a saintly person, even for a moment, one attains all perfection. Somehow or other, if one meets a saintly person and achieves his favor, then the entire mission of one's human life is fulfilled. In our personal experience, we have actual proof of this statement of Manu. Once we had the opportunity to meet Vishnupad Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. And on first sight, he requested this humble self to preach his message in the Western countries. There was no preparation for this, but somehow or other he desired it. And by his grace, we are now engaged in executing his order, which has given us a transcendental occupation and has saved and liberated us from the occupation of material activities. Thus, it is actually a fact that if one meets a saintly person completely engaged in transcendental duties and achieves his favor, then one's life mission becomes complete. What is not possible to achieve in thousands of lives can be achieved in one moment if there's an opportunity to meet a saintly person. It is therefore enjoined in Vedic literature that one should always try to associate with saintly persons and try to disassociate oneself from the common man. Because by one word of a saintly person, one can be liberated from material entanglement. A saintly person has the power, because of his spiritual advancement, to give immediate liberation to the conditioned soul. Here, Manu admits that all his doubts are now over because Kardama has very kindly described the different duties of individual souls. So, a few very important points that some which I'll get back to, but here, there's just many things that stuck out to me when I read it. Srila Prabhupada writes that he had met his own spiritual masters. And at first sight, for those who know the story, Srila Prabhupada was dragged into Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He was speaking, and Srila Prabhupada's friend, in Srila Prabhupada's words, he dragged him to him, and the assembly. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he saw then Abhay Charan Dey, or Srila Prabhupada, and immediately he instructed Srila, I believe he was offering obeisances or something like that. And immediately, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he didn't know who he was. As Srila Prabhupada writes here, there was no preparation. It's very interesting. There's no preparation. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, so immediately Bhaktisiddhanta, he told him, you're a young man, you're an educated young man, why don't you go preach in the Western countries? I think the English instruction came later. So immediately an instruction was there. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, how could he know who Srila Prabhupada was in one sense? and from the material sense. As Srila Prabhupada writes, there's no preparation. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he was speaking presumably on something completely unrelated to what was going on. Nor, how could it be seen that just some random, for all external vision, some random Bengali gentleman, young boy who's being dragged into the assembly of, presumably Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples were amongst them, who were elderly, not exactly elderly, but Srila Prabhupada was a young man at the time. So who could foresee, why would he instruct Srila Prabhupada to go to the Western countries to preach? How did he know that Srila Prabhupada would even understand the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya, or even take that instruction seriously? You know, it's not, if somebody walks in the temple, it's not the first thing you say to somebody. Of course, his cultural background was different, granted, but there was no preparation. It's very interesting. But by his grace, by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's grace, he gave Srila Prabhupada transcendental occupation. So anyway, I'll get back to this a little bit later, but Srila Prabhupada makes the point here that he met a saintly person and his life was fulfilled. His life was made perfect. Even by that, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he got the association. He later took initiation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, accepted him as guru, his spiritual master. And then there were more instructions and further associations with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta later. So it wasn't just that. But had that been the only thing, that was sufficient to perfect Srila Prabhupada's life. Everything that Srila Prabhupada based his life on, in one sense, at least the essential part of coming to the West and preaching, it was contained within that one instruction by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Then I'll continue here. So this is just demonstrating the effect of the sadhu sangha. This is a momentary association. You can go to the next verse. I won't read the purport because it's long. I'll just read the English. This is still Manu speaking to Kardama Muni. It is my good fortune that I have been able to see you. For you cannot easily be seen by persons who have not subdued the mind or controlled the senses. I am all the more fortunate to have touched with my head the blessed dust of your feet. And then the next verse. I have fortunately been instructed by you, and thus great favor has been bestowed upon me. I thank God that I have listened with open ears to your pure words. And this is a long purport, kind of. There's 2 pages in this book, but it's very nice. I don't remember reading it. I've read Bhagavatam twice. I don't remember this purport, but it stuck out to me this time I've read it. I'll read it in full. So Srila Rupa Goswami has given directions in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu on how to accept a bona fide spiritual master and how to deal with him. First, the desiring candidate must find a bona fide spiritual master, and then he must very eagerly receive instructions from him and execute them. This is a reciprocal service. A bona fide spiritual master or saintly person always desires to elevate a common man and who comes to him, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta did, for example, Srila Prabhupada, although he wasn't exactly a common man, you can take it like that. Because everyone is under the delusion of Maya and is forgetful of his prime duty, Krishna consciousness, a saintly person, a sadhu, always desires that everyone become a saintly person. So a sadhu, he makes other sadhus. It is the function of a saintly person to invoke Krishna consciousness in every forgetful common man. Manu said that since he was advised and instructed by Kardama Muni, he was very much favored. He considered himself lucky to receive the message by oral reception. It is especially mentioned here that one should be very inquisitive to hear with open ears from the authorized source of the bona fide spiritual master. How is one to receive? One should receive the transcendental message by oral reception. The word karna randrahi means through the holes of the ears. The favor of the spiritual master is not received through any other part of the body but the ears. This does not mean, however, that the spiritual master gives a particular type of mantra through the ears in exchange for some dollars, and if the man meditates on that, he achieves perfection and becomes God in 6 months. Such a reception through the ears is bogus. The real fact is that a bona fide spiritual master knows the nature of a particular man and what sort of duties he can perform in Krishna consciousness, and he instructs him in that way. He instructs him through the ear, not privately, but publicly. You are fit for such and such work in Krishna consciousness. You can act in this way. One person is advised to act in Krishna consciousness by working in the deity's room. Another is advised to act in Krishna consciousness by performing editorial work. Another is advised to do preaching work. And another is advised to carry out Krishna consciousness in the cooking department. There are different departments of activity in Krishna consciousness, and a spiritual master, knowing the particular ability of a particular man, trains him in such a way that by his tendency to act, he becomes perfect. Bhagavad Gita makes it clear that one can attain the highest perfection of spiritual life simply by offering service according to his ability, just as Arjuna served Krishna by his ability in the military art. Arjuna offered his service fully as a military man, and he became perfect. Similarly, an artist can attain perfection simply by performing artistic work under the direction of the spiritual master. And one is a literary man, he can write articles and poetry for the service of the Lord under the direction of the spiritual master. One has to receive the message of the spiritual master regarding how to act in one's capacity, for the spiritual master is expert in giving such instructions. This combination, the instruction of the spiritual master and the faithful execution of the instruction by the disciple, makes the entire process perfect. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes in his explanation of the verse in Bhagavad Gita, Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi, that one who wants to be certain to achieve spiritual success must take the instruction from the spiritual master as to what his particular function is. He should faithfully try to execute that particular instruction, and he should consider that his life and soul. The faithful execution of the instruction which he receives from the spiritual master is the only duty of a disciple, and that will bring him perfection. One should be very careful to receive the message from the spiritual master through the ears and execute it faithfully. That will make one's life successful. Okay, so I'll explain this a little bit. So the spiritual master engages the common man in Krishna consciousness. Differently so. Manu was feeling fortunate that he was advised by Kardama Muni. He was given spiritual instruction, and from here on, there's descriptions of some varnashram things like this, the duty of kings, etc., like that, some brief things. So Manu, there's some instructions going back and forth, and yes, this is an important point. Well, let's see. Sorry, my notes are a little splayed out. Yeah, so a few points. I'll try and go systematically. One should be very inquisitive. Srila Prabhupada writes, one should be very inquisitive to hear with open ears from the authorized source of the bona fide spiritual master. How is one to receive? Through the ears. The favor of the spiritual master is not received through any other part of the body but the ears. It's a very strange statement, isn't it? What does that mean? You don't get the favor of the spiritual master through any other part of the body but through your ears. Okay. Well, obviously, that means that the spiritual master's favor is his instructions, him speaking to oneself. That's the real favor of the spiritual master. Other parts of the body, as a little, can be strangely conceived, but in one sense, the spiritual master's favor can come in different forms. I've spoken on this before. It can come through material assets, also spiritual assets. The prime spiritual asset, and what the spiritual master gives, is spiritual sound. Transcendental sound vibration. That comes, he speaks it through his vani, his words, his instructions. And how is that received? Through the ears. And one is to hear with open ears, as is enjoined here. Through oral reception, through the holes of the ear, through open ears. Obviously, you can't hear through any other part of the body, so that's one explanation. Another explanation, the spiritual master, he has different assets, even material assets. So the spiritual master, guru, may give the disciple even material assets, it's seen, position, prestige, money, even sometimes, wife, even potentially, partner, etc., like that. The spiritual master gives many things, and the disciple can ask the spiritual master for such things. And the following verse, you don't have to go through it, but it says the disciple has the right to ask a particular favor from the spiritual master, as Kardama Muni asked a favor from Manu in the sense that he wanted to marry his daughter. So you can get the spiritual master, he's, what is that? Is Kalpataru. He's a desire tree, actually. But specifically, he's Prema Kalpataru. He's a desire tree of many different things, but specifically, what we're looking for is Prema, love of God, love of Krishna. So the spiritual master's ultimate benefit is he can bestow upon one love of God. He can bestow upon one so many other different things too. As we've seen, for example, the 8th canto was here. We have the example of Shukracharya in the 8th canto. By Shukracharya's favor, the Daityas were the demi-asuras, the demons. They were favored and they overcame the demigods. Actually, they were brought back to life, and then they were bestowed the power, material power, the strength to conquer the demigods. So, the Guru's power is such. He can give one both spiritual power and material power. But the real power, the real boon, mercy of the spiritual master is not received through the sense of touch, through the sense of sight, etc., through wealth, women, etc., position, prestige, which one can get if so wants. But the real benefit of the spiritual master is uh, his instruction. And furthermore, so that the guru's instruction is his causeless mercy. And that causeless mercy is manifested as his instruction, is also manifest as service to the spiritual master. As generally you don't think of that one's causeless mercy is my causeless mercy upon you is I'm giving you service to render unto me. In material world, we don't think like that. But the spiritual master is such. His mercy is that he allows us the Guru's mercy is that he gives us instruction to engage in his service. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mercy upon Srila Prabhupada was that he gave him instructions, he gave him an instruction which was ultimately to engage in his own service, to serve him in this manner. So, from a material point of view, it's very bewildering actually, but the spiritual master's mercy is manifest through service to himself. So, yes, this is the explanation. This is what's meant here. The favor of the spiritual master is not received through any other part of the body. And Srila Prabhupada qualifies this. This is largely not an issue nowadays. He's talking about TM, Transcendental Meditation, so-called, which is still going on, but it's much less popular. They give some mantra, the so-called gurus there, they give some mantra and they charge you, I think it's now $60 or something, or $100 for the particular mantra. It's a secret mantra you're not supposed to tell anybody else. But here, it was popular back in the 70s especially. But here, Srila Prabhupada says that it's not a secret. The spiritual master, he instructs the disciple through the ear, not privately, but publicly. Interesting, because the spiritual master does give some private mantras. But Srila Prabhupada, he qualifies that here, publicly he instructs them, you are fit for such and such work in Krishna consciousness. You can act in this way. So before everybody, publicly so, the spiritual master instructs the disciple like this, how to engage in Krishna consciousness. Why? Well, different reasons you can take it as. One principal thing is for the benefit of everybody. If you have something very valuable that people can benefit from, you share it with others. It's just like if I have some knowledge, especially knowledge. Material things you can only share with so many people. Just like if I have $100, I can only share that with so many people. And if I give it, then I lose it myself. But knowledge, especially transcendental knowledge, is such, even mundane knowledge, if you share it, you retain it, and then others benefit. So, the spiritual master acts in this way, that he instructs others publicly to both benefit even himself, actually. Transcendental knowledge purifies both one who hears the knowledge and also one who speaks that knowledge. Usually in material life, it's such that one knows something, the teacher knows something, and he benefits the other person. But in Krishna consciousness, just by speaking on topics of Krishna, both the person who's speaking and those who are hearing are both equally benefited, mutually benefited. As Srila Prabhupada writes here, it's reciprocal service. So that's one such explanation. Another thing is that not only the disciple is benefited, but also others who are there hearing such instructions are also benefited. Just as the Bhagavatam we're hearing now, it was spoken by Shukadev Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit amidst an assembly. Specifically, Shukadev, he spoke that to Parikshit because Parikshit Maharaj, he was going to die. He was cursed to die. But also, although other yogis who were assembled there, they also got immense benefit from hearing the Bhagavatam. So, public instruction was given. One such thing, why? So yes. And then, publicly. Another point, public instruction is there, but also further explanation is given here that, so what is this public instruction that's given here? Quote, you're fit for such and such work in Krishna consciousness. You can act in this way, end quote. And then he says, Srila Prabhupada gives examples. One is advised to act in Krishna consciousness by working in the deity room, doing editorial work, preaching work. Another is advised to carry out Krishna consciousness in the cooking department. Then he goes on that one can paint for Krishna. If one is a literary man, he can compose literary works for Krishna. Arjuna was a military man. He fought for Krishna, as we see in Bhagavad Gita. So, public instruction is there. Also, specific instruction is there. And it may not always be that what's given in the public instruction. In other words, it's just like some things, Shukadev Goswami, he spoke to Maharaj Parikshit that you're considering the fact that he was a king, for example. Okay, that's specifically, he's speaking to him specifically. But the fact that we're all to die, that's applicable to everybody. And just honing in more, specifically, here, the spiritual master, he knows the particular ability of a particular man, and he trains him in such a way that by his tendency to act, he becomes perfect. So public instruction is there. There's general instructions the spiritual master gives. Chant Hare Krishna, read literature, how to act a Krishna conscious, how to be Krishna conscious. But what that looks like for specific people, it may be different. Of course, everybody can engage in these things under some circumstances. Everybody can do preaching work. Some are more suited for the others. Everybody is open to cook. Everybody is allowed to cook for Krishna. Some are better than others. Some have a tendency more than others. Everybody can write some words in glorification of Krishna, as we're for everybody, for example, is enjoined for Vyas Puja, glorifying the spiritual master. Some have an ability more than others. Some take that further and write whole books. Everybody can draw for Krishna, paint for Krishna. Some have more talent than others. Some have more of a tendency than others. The spiritual master understands this even more so than the disciple sometimes. Just as we see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada, he knew English, Bhaicharan, he knew English, and he was an educated young man, as a fact, but at that point in his life, it didn't seem like he had any interest in going abroad, nor even considerations of it, from what we know. Largely, he was he went on to pursue business, and that's the background he was also coming from, mercantile background. So it didn't particularly seem like he had any sort of inclination or was self-inclined to go abroad and preach in the English language, although it seemed like he was a talented speaker that was known. He had some speaking ability, but this particular function, this ability, was specifically brought out by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to the utmost degree. As we see, even Srila Prabhupada with his own disciples, we saw so many things. Srila Prabhupada engaged disciples according to their tendency. And those disciples who previously didn't even know they had such a capacity for work, they went on to do very amazing things. Just like a good example, Jadharani Mataji, she was in college, and she I think she was doing some art. I don't know if she was majoring in art, or maybe she was undecided at the time, but you can see her drawings, her early drawings, which compared to what she was doing later. In other words, Srila Prabhupada, he engaged her Srila Prabhupada saw a spark in her, he fanned it, and it became a great flame. So similarly too, so many different things. Disciples with practically no knowledge of so many different fields, by the mercy of the spiritual master, they gained knowledge in those fields, and actually their propensity was brought out. Recently, even my Guru Maharaj, who was speaking, was giving a class, he was giving the example of engaging oneself according to one's psychophysical nature, and giving the example of how one Grahasta in Nandagram somewhere, some farm project, he's a weaver, and he was working in the IT field or something for many, many years. So he was you get a job, everybody gets a job, and we think, most people, they don't want to hate their job, so, we get a job which we can bear, at least, Very few people, they get jobs just for the sake of money, but they end up hating it. Very few people can sustain that. So presumably he went into IT, maybe for money, but also thinking he was inclined towards it. But then it turns out he liked weaving cloth much more than that. How could he know? How could he know such a thing? But the spiritual master engaged him like that somehow or another, and it got brought out. Why? How is that? How is it possible? There is, Srila Prabhupada writes, I noted it down somewhere. Here. In Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, first chapter, Srila Prabhupada writes that, anyway, I'll just make it a little short. The expert spiritual master knows well how to engage his disciples' energy in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Thus, he engages a devotee in a specific devotional service according to his special tendency. So, the spiritual master knows what's best for the disciple. He instructs the disciple accordingly. The secret, Srila Prabhupada, he writes, is that one must submissively listen to those who know perfectly the signs of God. So, and here we're hearing about open ears. So, not only we may have a tendencies, and that tendency may even be known to us, but more so than that, we should see recently there was a question about karma yoga, how to dovetail things in Krishna consciousness. I was thinking about that. There's a verse I read in the 11th canto by purports of disciples of Srila Prabhupada. He's talking about karma yoga. the chapter is called Karma Yoga. It's the first verse there. And Uddhava is asking about Karma Yoga. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada's disciples write that, I don't know if it's coming from Acharya, but it struck me that Karma Yoga, it doesn't mean whimsically offering one's activities to Krishna, but it means doing so, I'm giving like a paraphrase in other words, what struck me from the verse. It means doing so under the guidance of the spiritual master. So one may have a particular tendency, it may even be known to oneself, but everything is done through the spiritual master. And the spiritual master, he can bring out that tendency and bring it to the point of perfection. Just like Srila Prabhupada writes here, Bhagavad Gita makes it clear that one can attain the highest perfection of spiritual life simply by offering service according to his ability, just as Arjuna served Krishna by his ability in the military art. So it's confirmed by the spiritual master. The spiritual master confirms one's own, he makes clear one's innate tendency, and he confirms it, and he allows the disciple to act through that. A few other points I have here. So the spiritual master, you can see the ability of the disciple, even if the disciple may not even necessarily know his ability. It can come out like that. And he trains him in such a way. How does that training come? That training doesn't necessarily come directly through the spiritual master. Even the spiritual master may not necessarily know. It's just like Srila Prabhupada, he didn't, presumably, for all we know, I don't have know of any record of this, he instructed his disciples to become artists, and he instructed them how to paint paintings, but we don't have any particular record that I know of Srila Prabhupada himself painting. So, how is that? How did Srila Prabhupada train his artists to become artists if he didn't himself have knowledge? Krishna gave intelligence. Krishna gives dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. For those who worship me with love and devotion, Krishna gives them intelligence. The specifics are worked out by Krishna. Spiritual master gives generally, just like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he instructed Srila Prabhupada go to the West and preach, and if you ever get money, print books among other instructions. The specifics of those, he didn't instruct in. Where to go in the West, even what country to go to, how to do it, how to get the money, how to set it up. None of those plans were formulated. As Srila Prabhupada writes here, getting back to this, there was no preparation. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he just said that. You're an educated young man, why don't you go to the Western countries to preach? And almost like out of, not exactly impulse, but spontaneously he just spoke that. Srila Prabhupada accepted that, and Krishna made all arrangement for Srila Prabhupada to fulfill that order. Somehow he desired it, and by his grace, we're now engaged in executing his order. So, Srila Prabhupada, the disciple, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he saw the propensity in his disciple, and what happened, it's very nice how Srila Prabhupada writes here. He was given a transcendental occupation that has saved and liberated us from the occupation of material activities. So, the spiritual master saves us from material existence. He gives us transcendental existence. He awakens us to transcendental existence. He gives us a transcendental occupation. Ultimately, in the spiritual world, he gives us a transcendental occupation of rendering service directly to Krishna. But even within this world, the spiritual master gives us a transcendental occupation. So, it's different for everybody. And it comes in due course of time. It's not that immediately. It's just like, if one wants to conceive a child, it's not that a child. First, there's marriage, and then the child is conceived, and then birth happens, and then the child grows up. So there's a process, of course, but everything in due course of time. So, and all this can happen within a fraction of a second. Isn't that amazing? Not even a fraction, 1/11th of a second. Such association, such even one word, Srila Prabhupada is saying in the I can't exactly conceive of how one word of the spiritual master, in one sense, he can say Krishna, he can utter the names of Krishna, and then in that way, one's life is perfect. Technically, even a syllable of the name has its potency, but such as the association of a sadhu, of a saintly person. So, sorry, I can't explain time so well because it's very technical and confusing. So I'll just end there. And if anyone has comments or questions, I can take them at this point. I don't know the cutoff time, so okay.
So So this lava matra is translated as moment of time.
Yeah.
And is there a technical difference between moment and a second, or a moment is just a conception of a small duration of time?
Moment. Well,
And how is Srila Prabhupada using it more in the sense of the calculation that we are reading, or is he also using it in the sense of the of the colloquial English way of how a moment is used?
no, because he's calculating. Well, here we can't continue from the Bhagavatam here because the Bhagavatam it starts to get into. Well, actually, maybe we can. Hang on. Anyway, I can't do this math on the fly because it's a little. Anyway, I can't do this math on the fly here. But in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I can explain this. That so there's lava is in the purport as I quoted earlier. He writes by astronomical calculations, one lava is calculated as 1/11th fraction of a second. So presumably that second is a fixed value because by astronomical calculation, I don't suppose he's going by Western calculation because there's no such thing as lava within Western calculations. Presumably it's something he's referring to.
The second that he's referring to is the second.
Presumably, or has its equivalent in the
be,
Vedic. Yeah. He may be using the word it may that what we consider a second may be a little different from what Vedically is considered a second. Could be. I don't know the exact because I was looking here.
That in that chapter there is something called second?
Here in this chapter?
Yeah.
If you look at the next verses, it goes on to say, presumably the second is different. Because this is going to get a little technical, I'm sorry. But okay, you have one lava, right? Okay, lava is a 1/11th fraction of a second. Okay, so it has to fit into that fraction. Well, if you go into the fractions that come about, can you go to this? So because otherwise it will become very confusing. 3, 11, 7. So you have one lava, okay?
I guess you could just stick at the index because it'll be quicker to go through the translations.
Yeah, anyway, it's mainly just this verse.
Okay.
You can go down. You can go down. This is fine. Okay, so the duration of 3 lavas is equal to 1 nimeshana. So 3 lavas is the next unit. The combination of 3 nimeshanas, so
Nimesha.
3 times 3.
Okay.
Nimeshas. So the next interval, so interval 3, interval 9, we don't have, and then 5. So we don't have an interval of 11. How that interval of 11 is coming, don't exactly know. Presumably, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta.
So which is second here? Nimesha, Kshana, or?
Yeah, presumably there's something in between. That's what I'm saying. Because it's not here. Because there's no such 11th fraction that would occur here. There's fractions of a third, there's fractions of a ninth, and then there's fractions of like a 15th, basically.
Oh.
Oh, look at that. What do you know? Handy dandy chart. Okay. So it's different, actually.
So lava is described here as
8 divided by 45? What
8
is that?
40. Yeah. How do you say that in English? Anyways, 8.
0.17.
8/45ths of a second.
Yeah, the calculation is a little bit off, but like a little bit. I suppose that's a more exact value.
So when Srila Prabhupada is describing there a second, I think he's referring to
Could be a Western second.
what we understand.
Could be a
as
Western second. Presumably that calculation, because of the astronomical calculation.
Yeah, approximately equal to 1/11th of a second. Okay.
Presumably Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he made that calculation and did it then.
I guess I don't know if we do more math on that 8/45, you'll probably get 1/11th. I don't know how it works. You know. So.
Anything else? Navani?
Not to get too technical either, but
Okay.
I heard a class by Gumaraj that he said that 1 second of Lord Brahma is 100,000 human years. Have you heard something like this? Human years. Have you heard this? Have you heard this? 1 second of Lord Brahma is 100,000 human years.
Oh God,
Because and that was my question because I've heard that also. Because the thing is in the Leela when Lord Brahma took
Well, there is that Leela, yeah, you could
he
go
said
by
he was
that.
by one
Yeah,
moment.
actually.
It was 1 year, but then Guru Maharaj said in this one class that 1 second of Lord Brahma is 100,000 human years, and I don't know how to reconcile this. I don't know if you
Reconcile what? That
Because-
1 second is, and then
Guru Maharaj is saying that 1 second is 100,000 human years.
yeah.
Okay, but in the past time of Lord Brahma stealing the calf, he goes away for a moment, and 1 year passed. You know what I'm saying? Because if it's 1 moment he goes away and a year passed, that's
Yeah,
way,
it
that's way
depends.
less
What I
than
mean,
100,000
moment. You have to
human
see the
years.
Sanskrit word. That's one thing. What moment you're talking about?
Yeah.
Are you talking about lava?
Yeah.
Are you talking about Veda? I mean, you have to see exactly what's being discussed.
Either way, it's 1 year though. Like because Lord Brahma goes away for 1 moment. It's
Mhm.
either way, it's 1 year, in that pastime.
Another explanation, the easy cop out is that it's Krishna's pastimes. That's what he can do. I mean, he can defy the laws. He can do whatever he wants. That's one thing.
Okay.
So, but I mean, the technicality it will require looking at the pastime and seeing, okay, what is here, and then seeing what was said, and then like doing the calculation and from the 10th canto and seeing what word is used there, which I can't do on the fly. But
Okay.
if you want to do some homework, you can do
No,
that.
it's okay. That's what you're for. So, so on another point, you mentioned earlier in the class that a sadhu knows the sastra and he teaches it to others,
Yeah.
and he behaves accordingly. But that's also like the description of an acharya, right?
He may not always teach it to others, granted. That's, I said that, but it's not. For example, Gaurikishore Das Papaji, he didn't necessarily teach it to others, but he lived by it, for example. But
Yeah.
generally, it's taken like that. There's a general prescription. But
Right. So that was my question:
Yeah.
is that are all sadhus expected to be acharyas?
not well, it depends. I mean, in one sense, in another sense, no. Was Gaurikishore Acharya means one who teaches by his behavior. All of our, even though we call them acharyas, we don't necessarily imitate their behavior. Some of our acharyas, but they're acharyas in the sense that they showed how to love Krishna. So, sadhus, in that sort of sense, yes, that everyone is a sadhu. Of course, in another sense, sadhu is a general word. Also, I mean, even Mayavadis are considered sadhus. We consider them sadhus. Even in the second canto, the Bhagavatam itself, it calls them Mahatmas. So, but their behavior isn't exactly proper. In some ways it is, in some ways it's not. So it's kind of, it depends how you look at it, but generally speaking, is a sadhu always an acharya? Well, it really depends how you're defining it. Sadhu is meant to, generally speaking, a sadhu is meant to show exemplary behavior, unless he's on the Paramahamsa platform. So, generally speaking, yes. Even if he's not formally taking that role, his behavior should be exemplary to teach others. Because people look at sadhus for examples, as an example, just like people look to the brahmanas for example, and they want to see the qualities of brahmana manifest in them. So specifically, sadhus are expected to be acharyas in the sense that they teach by their own behavior. If a sadhu, for example, is or not just engaging in abominable things. If a sadhu is has much money, is enjoying material sense gratification, it looks very bad, and it gives a bad example to the general people. And in that way, and people become influenced by that, actually, as has happened. So, consciously or unconsciously, yes, sadhu shows others by his behaviors, even if he's not trying to do so. People look to sadhus and they imitate their behavior. And they see them, because a sadhu is an emblem of dharma, basically, essentially. So, in one sense, yes. So, is that okay?
It's not a white and black answer or question. But
Yeah, that's the general understanding. So, even if he isn't meant to, just like some people attempt to imitate Gaurikishore Das Babaji, for example. So, I mean, by his behavior. So,
Hare Krishna. Anyways, I didn't do like the calculation. I don't think it's needed. But so in the purport, or not the purport, but when Brahma steals the calves and then he comes back, in the Sanskrit, it's mentioned that Tritu Anesh Asaha. So that's 8, what would you say, 8/13 500,000ths of a second. So that's what is mentioned here. So that was a moment for Brahma.
How many tutis?
Huh?
How many Trutis?
Just one.
He was away for one Truti.
One Truti, which is 8.
A fraction of a
Yeah, which
hairline
I
of a
don't
second.
I don't know how you calculate that. It wasn't even like, or like a blink. It's just like, you can't like calculate that. And so that, like, so that mentioned here, that was like, so, anyway, so he was gone for that fraction of a fraction of some crazy time. And then that was 1 year in human measurement of time. So, yeah. So then 1 second, like if you take that, I was trying to take that, but that's like, anyways, I have to like sit down for a minute of that. Yeah, so it doesn't, yeah. Yeah, so it's, what Gurma is saying is right. Yeah.
What was the name of it? The amount of time or lava? The Truti.
It's like the smallest fragment.
I have a question on the hierarchy. There's Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra.
Yeah.
So Shastra always takes like that's the number one authority is scripture.
Uh-huh.
But there's seemingly statements that sort of counteract that, like what you just said. Sadhu Shastra, you know, by associating with the Sadhu, then there's Yasya Devi Parabhaktir,
Yeah.
So it seems like actually association with sadhus or, gurus is of, prominent importance, because even in the pastime of the Brahmana who's, holding the
Yeah.
Gita upside down is like, what kind of touch did he have with the scripture, but because his guru was like, you better read this,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see, although the Shastra is like, the prominent authority, but it seems like there are statements in the Shastra that say like, emphasis is on.
Yeah. Well, Shastra is the center, and Sadhu is always aligned with Shastra, but it's very important that, a few things were coming to my mind, which I just forgot as we were speaking. Well, one thing that was coming to my mind, is we have the example of favorable winds, but if you don't have a captain, how can you make use of those winds? But even if the winds are bad, taking some not so good example, but a good captain can navigate, even unfavorable situations. But if there's no captain, then what are you supposed to do even if the winds are there, So a captain makes good use of the winds. That's one thing. Another thing we have, example of Tapan Mishra. Lord Chaitanya is associated with studying many books. He was a bookworm. Lord Chaitanya, he criticized him for that. And then also and he instructed him directly. You chant Hare Krishna and Sarvasiddhi, you attain all perfection by this chanting. So, of course, he's God, but he's acting as a sadhu. So he attained all perfection from that, actually, which was the import of the Shastra, actually, Harinam, Harinam, Harinama Eva Kaivalam, etc., like that. And then I think the principal thing is like this, Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam, that the imports of Shastra, of Dharma, what Shastra is teaching, is hidden in the heart of a devotee. So a sadhu brings Shastra to life. Shastra is there and can give direction, but sadhu in one sense, although he doesn't go, Shastra is the center, don't get me wrong, that's also there. From a different angle, from an ontological sort of angle, or epistemological angle, but in another sense, the sadhu brings the Shastra to life and gives it form and function and shape and applies it. Because otherwise, Shastra is just general guidelines for the most part. And even then, the guidelines sometimes contradict one another. Sometimes you have so many different things, glorifications, counter-glorifications, statement to do this, statement not to do this, statement to do so many different things which we don't do. So how to understand it all? So the sadhu, he puts it all together. That's why it's very essential to study under Jaha Bhagavati, what is it? Jaha Bhagavati Pari Vaishnavirasthane. Study the Bhagavatam under a Vaishnava. You study the Bhagavatam is important, but you do it under a Vaishnava. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed somebody that, I forget. So, yeah. So, that's my reflections on that. Yes.
Well, the main point is that the moment Shastra is rejected, then the Guru becomes bogus, the Sadhu becomes bogus.
Yeah,
everything
obviously.
becomes bogus.
The sadhu lives according to.
So that's why Shastra remains the center. And all the empowerment comes from Shastra because Shastra comes from Narayana
Mhm.
himself and Krishna himself. So So even though the Shastra, glorifies sadhu, and one is criticized for approaching Shastra without taking the shelter of the Guru,
Mm-hmm.
the Guru sadhu, they all get their empowerment ultimately from Shastra. That because they act according to Shastra.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, everything is lost.
Mm-hmm.
Even Krishna, to set an example, acts according to his own.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it is proven that the sadhus and the pure devotees in Krishna are ultimately above even such instructions, but still they don't whimsically neglect it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whenever there's a discrepancy, Krishna or the sadhu makes sure that the Shastra is put back into the
Mhm.
center.
Mm-hmm. There's a fourth part. I was thinking as you said that. There's added IT here.
Yeah,
There's another-
tradition.
because sometimes Shastra is neglected. Otherwise, if you don't neglect it, it's niyamagraha. That if you're too rigid accepting it, if you're too lax, that's what we're speaking about. That's an issue. That's called deviation. If you're too rigid, that's also an issue. That's also not good. And it's just a fact. Sometimes Shastra gives contradictory. Just in the Bhagavatam itself, we have the dress of a brahmachari, which we don't follow. So, how to reconcile that when things aren't followed in Shastra by sadhus? Well, you look at the tradition. You see what's been done historically. Yeah. So, etc. like that. So, you had something?
Real quick, at the beginning of
Oh,
your
yeah.
class.
Okay, yeah. I have to ask the moderators too.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Anyways, at the beginning of the class, you referred to light coming in the window. You said
Yeah.
God rays. Did you call
God
them?
rays, I don't know. They
Did you
have
say
some
that?
name for that, yeah.
Oh, okay. Where does that come from? God
Where does
rays?
that come from?
Yeah.
What, the light coming in the window?
Well, why did you refer to it as God rays?
I don't know, that's just the English word for it. When you can see the light that's coming in through a window, often when there's smoke or something. Because why is it called that? Well, because
This is just you've heard in like common English or something.
yeah, it's common, at
Oh,
least
okay.
where I'm
I've
from.
never heard that.
Because
I just
people
wondered.
associate when the sun is behind like a cloud, you can see the rays coming out, and people associate that with God, and they call it like God rays like that. And also when it comes to same effect as coming through a window, same thing. So it's a Christian thing, yeah. So, but it's more specific than beams, which is I guess rays. Also good. Anything from the Matajis? There's a lot. Okay.
So I think what he was referring to is like when you look at a certain angle up at the sky when the sun is out, there are these little
Yeah.
wavy lines that you see.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about these in another class of Dao Yin recently, but I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. But it's like a meditation on these little tiny particles.
Yeah, it's observable by the eye. You can see it even when we've all like seen such things, and even pictures and videos you can see such things. Definitely is there. Yeah, it's a universal thing. It's not like a belief, It's like there. It's like as I was quoting, there's like evidence for the fact that you can like see it. so
Well,
yeah.
But there's something to actually just taking the time and doing that. You know what I mean? Like we all have the ability to
Yeah.
actually see that. And that's the particle of what 3 of those
Yeah, 3.
things put together.
Yeah, hexatom, 3 atoms combined. Yeah.
So, and then that translates into a unit of time, like you were saying. That's
Yeah.
interesting that it's a particle, but it's also
Yeah, we had a class on that recently. I'm not smart enough to understand that.
Oh.
Somebody broke it down in a recent class how that's done. Even materially, it's calculated like that. They have this concept of space-time, which is still current, which hasn't been refuted yet, to my knowledge. So even that is matter and time are interlinked. So yeah. Anything else? Anything more? Comments, sir?
You mentioned about the moment with the devotee. What was the time frame for that?
Time frame? Lava. Lava matra, only a moment.
And how do we not take advantage, or basically just how do we not take advantage of these moments that we get with the devotees? You know, I mean, I'm in this position in my life where I get the great fortune to be around the devotees, and I was really happy to do Gaur Arti with the devotees, but how do we not let our false ego get in the way of actually appreciating the association of devotees? Because we find that through the practice of devotional service, how you make advancement is associating with the devotees. How we came in contact with the process is through the devotees. But while you're in your purificatory process of anatta nivritti, you're with the devotees as well. And how do we not identify with that experience and create separation with the devotees and continue to glorify and have gratitude for the experience that we get to have with them, both the perceiving the good and bad?
Yeah, you see them as Krishna's servant, over and above one's friendship, understanding that this person is Krishna's servant. I have the good fortune to. Or one thing is how to not take advantage. You should take advantage of it in the literal sense, to take advantage of the association of devotees. But I know what you mean. But yeah, I find that helps. I understanding that the servants of Krishna and that there's ultimately Krishna's property, and Krishna is allowing us. Actually, it's like that. It's not just theoretical. Krishna is allowing us to associate with the devotee we're associating with. And he can give that or he can withdraw that based upon the situation. So, and even we may have friends, etc., like that, you know, friends, husband, wife, different relationships are there. But we should understand it's all, everybody's a servant of Krishna, and Krishna is allowing that association to go on. So trying to keep that, and consequently, trying to serve the devotees in that degree, to the best extent that we can. But in that consciousness that every every relationship is different, but just having the respect that this person is a servant of Krishna, even if things get strained or like this and that, and trying to serve that person, I find helps. Is that okay? There's more.
So when that class Guru Maharaj gave when he was here, he was speaking about fall downs, and he was talking about, like you mentioned in class, if someone's not situated properly within their psychophysical nature, and he said that they'll become frustrated. And but it seems there's circumstances where disciples don't get like direct instruction from your spiritual master in regards to like what service you should do in regards to your psychophysical nature. And then, and sometimes this person may feel frustrated quite often, even within their services that are not necessarily their nature, right? So what could you say about that?
I was thinking that question will come up. So presumably the same thing, this thing of the weaver, presumably, same example, presumably Guru Maharaj didn't directly instruct them to become a weaver. Presumably, I don't know. Could be, at least from my experience in the communities, it's just sort of worked out on a community basis, because I don't think Guru Maharaj will get involved in like such like a specific level with that. It's more of the needs of the community. Could be, could not be. So, could be. My point is that even if there's not specific instruction, in one sense there's that one quote where Srila Prabhupada told the disciple that my books are personal instructions, direct instructions, so that's there. And I've spoken on this a little bit before, but even if there's not specific instructions, one has innate abilities and innate capacities, and Krishna will, ultimately, the spiritual master is engaging one in devotional service, even if it may not be such a situation when the spiritual master comes and says, you do this. This is like the service for the rest of your life. It may not be as clear. He may do that for some people, he may not do that for others. How many people did Srila Prabhupada do that for instance? But there have been many devotees who have found, you could say, niche in Krishna consciousness without the spiritual master having directly done so. Personal instruction. Oh, hey, I'll tell you what. You can listen to this video. I found this very amazing. This Muda Mission release video. We know our own spiritual master. He didn't associate with Srila Prabhupada. And that association we had, there's the story of him receiving Gayatri, etc., like that. And he, of course, there's general instructions that he was acting on. that, whatever, that are there in mood and mission, which are also important and we should consider as that a disciple can take up such an instruction, which is in general instruction, as his life and soul, easily so, just as many devotees do for book distribution. Prabhupada Prabhu did for book distribution. Of course, he has his own story like that, but there are others who didn't have such instructions like that. Srila Prabhupada said jai to him or something like that. He didn't directly tell him, you do book distribution, but he felt like that. Others, anyway, before I lose my train of thought. So anyway, it's specific programs are there, as we have in Mood and Mission, if you've seen that chapter, which are open for everybody. Everybody can take advantage of it. And our own spiritual master was doing so. He was preaching in India, as Srila Prabhupada wanted his Western disciples to do. But nevertheless, he said in that video that Srila Prabhupada instructed him in a dream to write educational philosophical books. So, it could also come through like that, maturity in years and advancement in devotional service. The disciple is always in touch with the spiritual master, and that relationship becomes more and more refined as one progresses in one's spiritual maturity, even if the spiritual master isn't physically present. So I'm just making the point that here's a situation of a disciple and no physical little association with the spiritual master, but he was instructed by his spiritual master directly as to engage in this service. Also, Srila Prabhupada, similarly, the case of a dream, he was instructed in a dream by his spiritual master thrice to take sannyas, and he took that up. May not be that we have a dream, necessarily. We can't necessarily count on that, but I'm just making the point. It may not be externally the spiritual master may come, so it's not exactly like that always. But nevertheless, in the absence of such things, we should take these general instructions and make that our life and soul. See the need, act according to the need. Do the needful. Srila Prabhupada, he also instructed like that. And then, there's so many different programs open to so many different devotees. There's so many different things to engage in the Krishna consciousness movement. Sorry, I'll wrap up here soon. That Guru Maharaj, he writes in Mood and Mission that, actually, he said this too, that you can spend a lifetime just doing one particular service, and one lifetime isn't enough to do all the particular services in the Krishna consciousness movement. There's so many different things. Lokada Swami, for instance, he's dedicated this life now, to largely Padayatra. That's just one service, one very small thing within the Srila Prabhupada's huge, colossal movement. Jayadvaita Swami, he's dedicated his life to editing Srila Prabhupada's books. That's just very, very one. He also went in Padayatra for a year, but that's his transcendental occupation, you can say. It's one small thing in the kaleidoscope of Krishna consciousness. There's a kaleidoscope of things in Krishna consciousness. And if there's not a specific instruction, we can see the need with the attitude that how can I best serve my spiritual master? What is the best service I can render to my spiritual? What does my spiritual master need? What does the movement need? What does Srila Prabhupada need? What does Srila Prabhupada want? We can think like this. We can even go before the spiritual master and ask him, I'm thinking I can render service in this way. This is called karma yoga, dovetailing one's own propensities, having some idea to render service, and getting it confirmed by the spiritual master, etc. like that. Of course, karma yoga like that is not karma yoga in the mundane sense, is devotional service. So, like that. So, there are many different things. But it's succinctly, just wrapping up, that seeing what services are there, being educated as to what the spiritual master's mission is, what's needed, and what's approved by him and not approved by him, and then engaging accordingly, seeing one's own propensity, getting confirmed by, and if the spiritual master is not present, or somehow one can't communicate with the spiritual master, then going to devotees one views as seniors and trusts like that, and getting advice like that, senior sadhus like that. So, is it okay? This is comprehensive as I could give. Okay, so Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.